When I bought a new car, my father handed the keys to my brother and said, he needs it more. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, stayed out of trouble, and asked for nothing, life would reward me fairly. That red Civic was that reward. Every time I touched the steering wheel, it felt like I was touching a piece of my dream. Not something grand, but something that was mine, something I built with my own hands. It wasn't just a car, it was pride. It was a milestone of becoming an adult, and I chose to bring that joy home first, the place I thought would share in my happiness. When I drove back to Nokalpan, the sun was soft in the sky. I even played my favorite song on the way, picturing my dad smiling with pride and my mom tearing up because her quiet son had finally done something big. I parked right in front of the gate, stepped out, and called loudly, "Dad, Mom, come look at this." My father, Mark, walked out holding his usual can of beer. My younger brother, Peter, showed up right behind him, empty handed, flashing that half smile I'd seen 1,000 times. He still lived at home, didn't work, had no clear direction in life beyond enjoying the comfort of our parents' house. But I never judged him. Everyone has their own path, and I chose mine. I pointed to the car like a kid proudly showing off a straight A test. My dad stepped closer, walked slowly around the car, and gave a small nod. "Nice car, Maximus." I smiled. But in his eyes, there was something I couldn't name. Not pride exactly, but something colder, calculated. I didn't understand it then. Peter strolled up and ran his hand along the hood. "Damn, nice ride, bro," he said with a tone that was half joking, half passive aggressive. "But you know what? I'm sick of not having a car to go look for jobs. It's hard out here." I nodded politely. "Yeah, it really is." Then, like a slap I never saw coming, my father looked me dead in the eyes and said in his cold, commanding voice, the one he always used when giving orders, "Maximus, Peter needs this car more than you do." I froze. "What? You live close to work. You've got the metro, the bus. He has nothing. Give him the keys. For the sake of the family." I couldn't believe it. I tried to keep my voice even. "Dad, I paid for this with my own money. This car's mine." Peter shrugged, arms folded like he was watching a sitcom. "You can always buy another. I need one now." And before I could say another word, my father, the man I once respected most, tossed my car keys to Peter without blinking. What I felt wasn't just shock, it was heartbreak. I stood there frozen as Peter slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove off like none of it ever belonged to me. The sound of the Civic's engine echoed down the neighborhood street, but this time it wasn't the sound of freedom. It was the beginning of a nightmare I didn't know how long would last. My dad placed a hand on my shoulder, as if to comfort me, but his voice was like ice. "You'll understand one day. Family comes first." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because if I opened my mouth at that moment, I might have screamed something I could never take back. I turned and walked away, and inside, something broke. I knew then that I'd lost more than just a car. I had lost something fundamental, something I'd spent years building, my trust. I couldn't sleep that night. Lying in my familiar bed in my Santa Fe apartment, I tossed and turned hundreds of times. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father turning away and throwing the keys, like tossing aside some useless toy. I kept hearing Peter laughing. "You can always buy another one. Sa ti mind to put this." And I kept seeing the red Civic, my dream, disappear in a cloud of dust without even a goodbye. The next morning, I drove back to Naukalpan, carrying with me a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe they would apologize. Maybe Peter had just borrowed it. I wanted to believe I hadn't been betrayed, not that shamelessly, but the first thing I saw when I arrived was the Civic, parked boldly at the front gate like a brand new toy in the hands of someone who's never valued a thing in his life. But that wasn't the worst part. When I walked closer, my heart sank. There was a large, deep dent right on the driver's side door. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. I stood there staring at the dent, my hands tightening into fists. Peter was nowhere in sight. My father was sitting casually in the yard, sipping his coffee. When I asked about it, he just shrugged. Probably someone bumped into it. No big deal, don't make it into a scene. No big deal? What's small about someone smashing my car? The car they ripped from my hands less than 24 hours ago. That's when I started to understand something deeply painful. If I didn't stand up for what belonged to me, no one else would. My family had chosen Peter, not because he was right, but because that's who they always were, always forgiving weakness, always blaming the one who could endure more. So I made a decision, one I never thought I'd make. I started investigating. I began with the most basic step, the vehicle registration office in Ciudad de Mexico. I waited in line under the suffocating heat, sweat soaking through my shirt, my mind spinning with 100 questions. When it was finally my turn, I explained everything to a woman in her 40s, stern-faced, but with kind eyes. "Is the car under your name?" she asked. "Yes. Every bill, every document is under my name. No one else's." She checked the system and nodded. "Then don't worry. Here in Mexico, no one can change the name on a car without the legal owner's signature. No valid documents. No one can take that car from you. Legally?" I exhaled like someone who had just swum through a flood. For the first time since all this began, I felt like I wasn't entirely powerless. On paper, I still owned it. I still had rights. But that feeling of reassurance lasted only a few days. A week later, the whole family threw a birthday party for my mom. I brought a cake, an expensive one from Polanco, as a small gesture to keep the peace. I wanted to use that gathering to speak calmly with my father. But the moment I stepped into the yard, I froze. Peter was standing in front of the Civic, patting the hood like it was a trophy. Around him were aunts, uncles, cousins, laughing hysterically as he told the story of the weekend getaway in the new car. I stood there, frozen, cake box in hand. One of my uncles laughed loudly. "Good thing Peter got the car. If Maximus had kept it, it'd be collecting dust for a year." I clenched the box, pressing my lips together. In that moment, something crystallized. This wasn't about the car anymore. This was about honor. This was about being turned into a joke in the very house I grew up in. I set the cake down on the table, walked into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and said to myself, "Maximus, if you don't stand up now, they'll crush you forever." That night, I ordered a cheap security camera and installed it in my building's parking lot. I no longer hoped for reconciliation. From that moment on, I officially began the fight to take back what was mine. The security camera I installed in the parking lot wasn't anything fancy, but it was good enough to catch what I needed. I had it aimed directly at the Civic, which was currently parked at my apartment building because Peter had brought it over to take some cool shots for social media. I pretended I wasn't home, but in reality, my eyes never left my phone screen, watching the live feed through the app. And then I caught the first thing. A figure appeared around 2 a.m., hood pulled low, moving sneakily toward the car. He pulled something out of his jacket, looked like a metal rod or maybe a bat, and slammed it hard against the driver's door. That was the dent I had seen before. I zoomed in on the footage, and my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't Peter. It was Marcus. Marcus, Peter's best friend, the shadow who always followed him around, the guy who got expelled for stealing and used to mock me at family parties. One question immediately echoed in my mind. Why would Marcus do this? And why my car? I didn't need more evidence to know Peter was behind it. Marcus had no reason to vandalize my car unless it was a warning shot sent on Peter's behalf. That only confirmed what I feared. This wasn't jealousy anymore. This was a calculated scheme. So I started watching Peter more closely. I secretly accessed his social media, filled with photos of him posing next to the Civic like he was filming a commercial. His latest caption read, "Because I deserve it." I almost exploded. What makes a freeloading, jobless dropout think he deserves something built on someone else's sweat and sacrifice? But I stayed quiet. I needed stronger proof, and I didn't have to wait long. A few days later, I received an unexpected email from my bank. Someone had submitted an application to open a credit card under my name. My heart jumped. I hadn't done that. When I opened the full email, I saw the application details matched 90% of my personal info: name, date of birth, temporary address, secondary phone number, everything except one thing. The mailing address listed was my parents' house. At that moment, I knew Peter had crossed the line. I immediately called the bank, requested the application be frozen, and asked for all the details. The representative confirmed that the file was submitted from an IP address in Naucalpan, where my parents live. And when I carefully checked the phone number attached to the application, I froze. It was Peter's. No more doubt. After taking the car, after humiliating me in front of our entire extended family, Peter had started stealing my identity. It wasn't just a dent on the car. It wasn't just the smug, "You can always buy another one." He wanted to be me, take my reputation, my privileges, and even my dignity. I printed every document, clipped the footage of Marcus vandalizing the car, screenshotted all of Peter's social media posts, saved the bank's email. I placed everything into a black folder and walked into the local police station in Santa Fe, like a man who had nothing left to lose. "I want to file a report for identity theft, property damage, and personal threats," I told the officer, my voice firm. He looked at me, saw I had everything laid out, and nodded. "You're doing the right thing, but be prepared. From here on out, things won't be easy." I knew that. I knew I had just declared war. Not on one man, but on an entire family. But I also knew this. If I backed down now, I'd be seen forever as the weak son, the one who couldn't even protect what he built with his own two hands. And I'll be damned if I let that happen. I left the police station feeling like a blade had been dragged across my chest. A strange mix of relief, because I had finally stood up for myself, and a heavy dread, knowing that the real storm had only just begun. I thought I was prepared, but less than a day later, I got a message from Peter. "You think this is over? Don't come crying later." I didn't reply. Instead, I reset the entire security system in my new apartment and cut ties with anyone remotely connected to the family. But that very night, while unpacking a box I hadn't opened yet, I found a photograph. Not a keepsake. Not a family picture. It was a photo of me, caught mid-step outside my office, blurry and tilted, clearly taken from a distance, by someone hiding, someone watching. There was no note, no threat. But to me, it felt like a declaration of war. Someone had invaded my privacy, and that person knew exactly where I was, what I was doing, and how I was living. My hands trembled. Not from fear, but from a cold, furious rage. I immediately called the officer handling my case and sent him the photo. After a brief silence, he said, "We're bumping this file up to high priority." The next morning, I returned to the old house in Naucalpan. My father was watering the garden. When he saw me, he didn't look surprised. He just raised an eyebrow. "Here to blame someone again?" I clenched my fists. I didn't come to fight. I came to ask, "Do you know who's been following me? Do you know what Peter's been doing? Or are you going to close your eyes like you always do?" He set the watering can down and looked at me as if I were a stranger. Maximus, you always make everything into a big deal. He's your brother. He just needs a little support. Support? By stealing my identity? Vandalizing my car? Threatening me with a knife? That's support to you? I nearly shouted. He kept his voice calm. You're selfish. You've got a good life. A job, a house. Peter has nothing. If you won't help him, then who will? I stood there frozen. That answer told me everything. To my father, Peter would always be the one worth defending, no matter what. No matter how far he went, Dad would find a reason to excuse him. A few days later, as I gathered more documents for the police, I returned to the old house again. My mother wasn't home. Peter was off somewhere. I took the chance to go into his room for one final move. And I found it. A wooden box hidden under the bed. Inside were the documents Peter had used to impersonate me. Photocopies of my ID, copies of our family registry, utility bills, and an old handwritten letter. The paper was yellowed with age. I recognized my father's handwriting. The letter was dated years ago, addressed to my mother, but what it revealed was something no one had ever told me. I promise I'll protect Peter. No matter what happens, I'll make it up to him. After what I did to his mother, I can't turn my back on him. I owe him a lifetime. I read it over and over, and then it hit me. Peter wasn't my mother's child. He was my father's son, from another woman. And all the favoritism, all the excuses, everything my father ever did, it was all repayment for an old mistake. I walked out of that house with legs that felt like stone. My father hadn't just betrayed me with his actions. He had betrayed me with the very foundation of what I believed to be true. And in that moment, I finally understood. My family had never been fair to me. Because from the very beginning, I was never the one chosen to be loved. I walked away from the old house with the letter in my hand, proof of a truth I wished I had never known. A part of me shattered that day, not because Peter was an illegitimate child, but because I finally understood. My entire life, I had been competing in a race where the winner was already chosen before it began. My father didn't just defend Peter out of love, he did it out of guilt. A debt he took upon himself using me as the balance to repay it. But it ends now. I no longer want to understand Dad or step aside from my brother. I want justice. I want my life, whole and untouched. I went back to the police station and submitted additional evidence. The handwritten letter, copies of forged documents, security camera footage, surveillance photos, and even the threatening messages from Peter. Officer Ramirez, the one handling the case, stayed silent for a long moment before saying, I'm filing for an emergency search warrant for your parents' house. We have enough cause to believe this was premeditated. 3 days later, I got the call. Maximus, this is Ramirez. We executed the warrant this morning, and we found what we needed. I could barely breathe. He walked me through it all, every detail. Stolen personal records, a handwritten plan to commit credit fraud under my name, hidden in a drawer. Peter was arrested shortly after, along with his best friend Marcus. They were taken into custody on multiple charges: identity theft, property damage, armed threats, and personal data abuse. The police also opened a broader investigation to determine if Peter had been involved in other financial fraud schemes. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. It had to come to this for me to be allowed to defend myself. From the very people who used to call themselves my family. I hadn't planned to visit Peter. But in the end, I went. Not to forgive, but to face him. When I walked into the interrogation room, he no longer looked like the arrogant younger brother. He looked like someone undone, pale, cuffed at the wrists, deep shadows under his eyes. He looked at me, then whispered, "I just wanted something that was mine." I replied, "So did I, but I worked for it." "You stole." As I turned to leave, Peter shot me one last look and hissed, "Dad said I was the debt he owed. I didn't ask to be born into that." I said nothing, because I knew Peter had lived his whole life as a shadow of someone else's guilt, but that never gave him the right to trample over others. A few days later, my father called. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He just yelled into the phone, "You destroyed this family over a car and your damn pride." I paused for a moment, then answered, calm but cold, "No, Dad. I just stopped letting people use family as an excuse to walk all over me." And then I hung up. I sold the red Civic, the one that once symbolized pride, the dream I'd built with my own hands. Now, it was just a relic of a nightmare. With the money, I bought an old Jetta. Nothing flashy, nothing special, but mine. No one could take it from me anymore. One evening, I wrote down the entire story and posted it on a forum for people who had been betrayed by their own families. I didn't expect much, but soon, hundreds of comments flooded in. Not just sympathy, but shared pain, similar stories. I wasn't alone. I ended the post with a single sentence. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who never make you feel like you don't belong. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. For the first time in a long, long while, I can drive without ever looking back. Some of us grew up believing that family is the safest place on earth, but one day we wake up and realize it was also the very first place where we were hurt. Maximus's story isn't just about a car. It's about what that car stood for. Independence, sweat, tears, and pride. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't losing the car. It was being betrayed by his own father and younger brother. Maximus wasn't born to be a sacrifice. He refused to stay silent when forced to hand over what was his, all in the name of family duty. He did not tolerate threats. He did not ignore identity theft. He did not sit still while being watched. And he sure as hell didn't forgive abuse just because it came from blood. This isn't the story of a victim. This is the journey of someone who stood up and fought back, even when the enemy wore a familiar face. Maximus did the right thing. He protected his boundaries. He exposed the ones who hurt him. And he walked away from those who only know how to take, never how to appreciate. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't forgiveness. It's the strength to walk away. And sometimes doing what's right isn't holding on to family for the sake of appearances. It's choosing the right people to call family. To you, if you're going through something like this, you're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not wrong for demanding respect. And you are not alone. There are thousands who've had to learn to walk away just to finally live as themselves. Remember this. Family is not a place where someone gets to hurt you and then expects your silence. Be like Maximus. Don't let anyone steal your freedom, your dignity, or your future. Not even those who claim to be family. You don't owe anyone anything except yourself. Choose you. Always. And that's where this story ends. If this touched you, please leave us a comment, like, share, or subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video.